Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Jacqueline Jax and I have a watercolor company. If you haven't checked it out, go and check it out at jaxwatercolor.com. I'm also a watercolor artist, but just recently I started a subscription service for watercolor and I think it's doing really well. The purpose of it is to deliver Christmas in watercolor all year long. And so far my members have been screaming about it and just loving it. So I thought I would jump on here and just talk about filling pans. Right now in front of you I have some MGraham that I'm just completing, and these took about 6 weeks to do. Now, of course, the little ones take a lot less time, but things like these larger ones take a lot more time. And I'm going to show you why. I also want you to maybe start paying more attention to how much paint you actually put in your full pans. Now, I have really large full pans. They're not like really heavy on the sides, and they're very deep. So perhaps they aren't standard full pans. I'm not really sure, but I can tell you this. And this was an experiment that I recently did because I got some of these little 5 ml tubes, and I haven't really played with these little ones in a long time. But watch this. Now, typically when I fill a watercolor pan, I will start and do it in very small layers. So you can see how the first layer is just there. Now, if I were to fill this from start to finish, then there would be air bubbles and there would be other things going on with it. It might shrink away from the sides, you know, and it's just better if you just fill it in small layers. So for something like a full pan, it's way better to do it in about 6 weeks, each week doing another layer. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. But first, let's check out this 5 ml tube of Schmincke, because every single watercolor tube is different. And I have so many of them. I mean, literally I have everything from White Nights to Daniel Smith to Schmincke. I have MGraham, just so many available on the site. So this is a Shire olive, and typically the Schmincke super granulating colors, they pour really well and they dry a lot faster. So these ones I don't typically need to do in 6 layers, but watch this. Now, your average full pan doesn't typically have 5 mLs of paint, but mine do. And I think it's significant because if we're having a conversation about the prices of watercolor today, and you realize that within a full pan of paint, there is 5 mLs that go into these pans, you really start to understand how much watercolor you're actually getting in your pans. And that's really important because, like, for instance, this one is a half pan, right? So typically in a half pan, you would see it about like this, where it's full to the top, but maybe there's a little bit of a divot in the center. Now, when I filled it originally, it was overflowing on the top, but as time moves on and it settles and dries, a lot of the moisture comes out, which is going to make it sink back down. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of watercolor in there. There is, but the only way to get these out and actually have them dry is at some point you have to stop filling. And they do just keep shrinking back, all of them. But the benefit of getting tubes hand poured is as follows. I don't care what any brand says. The tubes are definitely different paint than the pans. So when you get them hand poured, you're getting a lot more value than the average pan. So I could swear in these pans, and I know a lot of people say, no, ours are the same formula. They're not the same formula. They don't even dry the same. And I'm sitting here doing this over and over again. These are nothing like my store-bought pans. So I have store-bought pans that came from all of the brands, not just my favorite, which is Schmincke, all of the brands. So as I went through and I hand poured all of these, I noticed the paint was different. It definitely is more super granulating and it's a lot nicer. Now pay attention to this. So I'm topping it up, right? Because listen, if I don't do this, it's going to sink back and we're going to have, um, we're not going to have as much. So now typically I would do this in 2 pans, right? I would do this in 2 pours. I wouldn't do it in 1 full pour. But did you just see that? That's a full 5 ml tube of paint just went into 1 full pan. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a toothpick, and the reason why we need to stir it is because if you don't stir these things, they're going to get air bubbles. And that is the benefit of why I typically don't pour the whole thing. Now I poured it this time because I want you to see that there actually is a 5 ml tube of paint in 1 full pan. And it's important that you realize that because a lot of people think that pans don't have as much as tubes, and so they price comparatively. And what I say is that if a 5 ml tube of paint is more expensive than your full pan, you probably can get a hand poured full pan for less, you know, and sometimes it's even better. I think it's better anyway. I like it. Okay, so see how I started to stir it? I stirred it and stirred it, and now it's just about a little bit over the top. Now I'm going to go in the corners and we're going to try and work this watercolor around a little bit just in case. Now there will be air bubbles in here because I poured it in 1 shot. If I would have poured it in at least 2 pours, maybe 3, this would have been more free of air bubbles, but stirring it with the toothpick really does help. Now, so that's what we have. So we can see it's got some build up on the top. It's got a lot more play. It's mixed together a little bit more. So if when it comes out of the tube, because tubes after a little bit when they sit, they separate. So the binder will separate away from the paint, and then you'll end up with a lot of that like kind of the caramel color binder coming out. That is gum arabic, and that is fine if it does it because you can just stir it back together. But usually we mull paint to get those two to bind together, and it's the binder mulled in with the paint really, really well with something called a muller. So with something like this, it's a muller. When you mull the paint together, you're making the binder and the paint come together. And without enough mulling for long enough, it will separate, and it won't activate properly with the water. You can tell even some colors, no matter how long you mull them, you will still get it on your fingers, you know, when they're dry. And that's because some pigments they either require more mulling or they just don't all get absorbed into the binder as much as they should. So what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of capping along the edge with this. And yeah, a lot of work does go into hand poured paint, but you know, it's worth it. I think it's really worth it because this is what I use. And of course I mix my own paint too. But I think a beautiful set of hand poured watercolor is just a gem to have, you know, especially if you're in places where you can't get a hold of the watercolor. And I find that I think the majority of people can't get a hold of most of these colors. So there we go. All right, so this is what we're looking at here. For those of you who are still kind of catching on. So this is a full pan of schminke, and as you saw, it takes a whole 5 ml of paint. Now what happens once it dries? Well, let's take a look, because this is how it should be, but then once it dries back, and there's definitely a little bit of room still in here. Now, of course, I can't break open another tube and continue because this is going to dry back. And when it hits an airplane, when it goes into really dry weather, it is going to dry back still. But as you can tell, there's 5 mLs of tube paint in each one of these full pans. And that's how I fill them. Just like these, they're is a lot of paint in the half pans as well, and there's a lot of paint in the quarter pans. So if you're looking at hand poured watercolors and you're wondering if the value is there, it is there because it is much different in the hand poured watercolor than it is in the pressed watercolor, which is the ones that come out of the factory. Even though Schmincke, I can say, they pour their watercolor over a long period of time and they let them dry. But and I love Schmincke. It's my favorite brand. But as compared to like something like A Gallo, who makes honey watercolor, and they are handmade and hand poured. They do them in small batches. They do them in runs several times a year, and those again are much different. You'll notice it's just a different quality. So get your watercolors hand poured and realize that these full pans, even though on the internet it says that they have less in them, there is an actual full 5 ml of paint in the full pans in order to get it that way. Now, when it dries back, I want to remind you, it is going to be a little bit of a divot there, but hey, depends on the formula too. Now, this is how MGraham does, and I noticed that MGraham shrinks back less of all of them. The worst one is Daniel Smith. Let me see if I can grab you a Daniel Smith one. So when you pour Daniel Smith, the thing that happens with Daniel Smith, now this was full 5 ml. Now look at what happened to it. It shrank back. So where did all the paint go? This was a 5 ml bunch of paint. It was in a tube and it was just as full as this one. But over the course of the weeks, it shrank back all around the sides, and it shrank back that much in the pan because you can see how it was all the way up to the top. See all the dye there from the stain? It was all the way full, and look at that. So Daniel Smith is very, very difficult, and it takes a ton of paint to get a full pan out to anyone. So I don't do a lot of the Daniel Smith ones, especially the full pans, because of this. It's just too expensive, and people, when they see that cost, they're like, oh no, I don't want to pay that much. So like, you see the difference in these, right? So MGraham's really good. Handmade watercolors are great. The Schmincke pours really, really well. There's my husky. She's lost her ball. I'm trying to think of what else pours well. White Nights doesn't do too bad, actually, but I noticed that the regular watercolors by White Nights are very hard to pour, where the super granulating colors are much easier. I actually love to deal with the granulating colors myself. I like those the best. So anyway, I'm going to be painting these and swatching the colors out. If you are interested in seeing the MGraham swatches, then hang out with me because I'm going to do a few of these and then we'll be shipping these out. Okay, so we're back. So I finished pouring a bunch of those MGraham watercolors for an upcoming sale that I'm doing over on the website. And now we're just going to take some of these great watercolors and go through here. Oops. Now these are the collector's sheets. So what these are is when you purchase watercolor on my website, they come with one of these neat little cards. And they look like this. So you'll get the watercolor and then you get this little collector's card. And what these are great for is you can collect all of them, and then you always have the pigment information and stuff about your watercolor that you have, and then a scan tag to go and pick it up at the store. So you know what brand it is and the name, and then on these sheets that I've just revised, it also has the pigment information. So that's going to be really helpful. I would suggest, I mean, you can either use these in your book, like put them in an actual book, or you could just put a little hole punch at the top and go ahead and put them together like on a key ring, so you can keep all of your swatches right on your watercolor desk. So it depends on how you want access to them. Like if you put them in a book, it's great, but you have to, you know, eventually, if you have a lot of watercolor like I do, your book just is enormous and huge. So I think it just depends on how much watercolor you're going to have on hand. If you have a full thing, then maybe just put the little hole in here and then just hold them together that way. And that way you can kind of flip through them, you know. It's a shame to waste this. It's so nice. I love this watercolor. So that's Azo Yellow by MGraham. I'm going to put some of it back in here. It's a beautiful PY151 as opposed to PY150 that is more of the Azo Yellow, that's kind of like not this bright. It's got a little more, I would say a little more gold kind of look to it, right? Azo Orange is next. And MGraham colors are high in honey, so they do re-wet really well. I've been doing good with them. A lot of people said, you know, you can't put MGraham in your subscriptions because they're not going to travel well. But I just sent out an MGraham subscription to my subscription service. So all of my monthly subscribers got a full set of MGraham in their subscription, and I did some ways to paint with it, and it was really fun, and it worked out great. I didn't hear from anybody saying that it didn't make it or it was all over or it melted. Of course, it is like right now, this is our November subscription, so I did kind of wait to put it in this subscription so that if it was gonna like be really hot in some of the areas where it was traveling, that it wouldn't have a major issue. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of giving a little variety of the color of what this beautiful orange, this Azo orange looks like on the swatch. So I'm just kind of doing a little something extra on the swatches so that you can see how pretty this watercolor looks. And on occasion, I will even do some wet areas just to make them look a little more interesting, because I like to try and represent what the color actually looks like when you paint with it, not just what the color looks like in one tiny little swatch. And that can be a little bit difficult, but we manage pretty good on these swatches because they're pretty large. So this next one is Pyro Red. And you can see how it goes from very light. You almost get like a light pink in this PR254 all the way to that really nice, beautiful, bold red. Paints like a dream. Now reds are usually, when I make hand watercolor reds take a long time to mull because to get them very smooth, you have to break down the pigments typically a lot more than a lot of the other watercolors. So there's a lot of, you know, goodness and time and energy that goes into reds. But a beautiful red is always wonderful to have in your palette. And this one I feel is a primary, beautiful semi-transparent primary. There's a lot more transparency in this red than you would think. If you use it out of the tube, it's going to give you a hard time. So I really recommend that you pour it into a pan or get a, or you can go on my website at jackswatercolor.com and get a hand poured pan of Pyro Red, because the tubes, they have to dry. Otherwise, it's a mess. It will get all over your fingers. It will stain, and you know, you'll have a real tough time. It's way easier to work with when it's in a dried pan. So hand poured pans are great. They're more vibrant. And This color's just beautiful. Isn't that pretty? So I did some little variations of the color. I don't know if you can see it because it's such a bright color, but when that dries, it's going to have some dry backs and some washes, very similar to here. And we can even dramatize that a little bit just by, because this is watercolor paper. I paint all the swatches on Fabriano from Italy. I love this paper. And I also sell it on my website. So if you can't get it where you are and you'd like to try it, my sketchbooks are made with this paper and I sell it by the sheet too. Okay, so we did some variations. So this one needs to dry and then they get cut up. They're really, really nice. So those are the swatch cards. So set those aside. All the swatch cards from my website are hand painted, and even sometimes I'll go through and do little mini paintings and throw those in there for you too, so that you just get inspired. That's what the monthly watercolor subscription is all about. It's about that beautiful feeling of inspiration. So next we're going to do the phthalo green. This is a very bright and staining color. This is also another one that you do not want to tube because it is so staining. And if you drop it or you have to open the tube a lot, the first opening of these tubes, they will kind of explode out. So be very careful if you're buying watercolor by the tube and you open them. I've had so many in transit just explode. So, and it is a real mess just because of the, I don't know, there's something about the watercolor that it just really, it's highly staining. It really is. I would say of all the ones that I deal with, probably MGraham is the most difficult to deal with, but it's the most lovely to paint with though, you know? But I noticed that the watercolor, it does stay wet for a very long time. It's very sticky and it has to dry. It just has to set. So there are some things that I do in setting this watercolor in the pans just so that it can make the transport. I haven't tried transporting it in the heat of summer yet, and I don't know that I'm going to do that. But I do really love this version. This PG7, this phthalo green is a beautiful, beautiful green. So pretty. So, so pretty. It actually is even more green than this light. I think this light is super, super bright. Yeah, it almost looks like a blue green, but this is a very big, like viridian. It kind of looks like viridian green by Mission Gold, how it's not like, it's really bold. A lot of people do PG7 for viridian green, actually. Queen Gold. This is a really beautiful Queen Gold. I like this one because it's made with PY150, which is my favorite yellow. When I was swatching the yellow, when I was swatching Azo Yellow, remember I mentioned that that was PY, I think 151, wasn't it? Yeah. The Azo Yellow was PY151, which is like the brightness of this if it were not put on with the thickness. I try to get the different variations of color into these swatches, like I said before. So I'm working the color onto the paper. This is actually really good practice for you too. You should do swatches like this. And I'm getting a variation of the light and the dark. And then I'm just going to kind of add some streaks of water here to let the watercolor just settle into the paper a little bit more. I think this is a really lovely Queen Gold. The original Queen Golds, the pigment is no longer available, so companies have been coming up with their own kinds of Queen Golds. And I really like this one. I think it's really beautiful. It's a lot like Daniel Smith, but Daniel Smith, it dries so badly. It's not my favorite, so I much rather play with the honey version. This is really pretty, right? So, oh my gosh, I just realized that I painted Queen Gold all the way across, and this was supposed to be Anthraquinone blue, so I'll have to redo it, but I'll put a label on it. But isn't that beautiful? Ultramarine blue is next. PB29. Surprisingly, this one has a lot of granulation in it. And I don't know what it is about, it's semi-opaque, but I kind of felt like MGraham was more of a smoother brand of watercolor, you know? You know what I'm saying? I think with all the honey and the way it feels, it always re-wets so well, and it just doesn't feel like it's got a lot of grain to it. But surprisingly, this ultramarine, and I included this one in our monthly subscription, this one granulates beautifully. It's really fun as a mixing color, and it's got a lot of really gorgeous tone to it. Cerulean blue. I don't have that one on my palette, so let's grab one here. So cerulean blue is a beautiful color. It's in a lot of different lines. This one is a PB36. I think they did a great job with this cerulean blue. Personally, it reminds me of chromium cerulean, but it's not as thick. It's a semi-opaque rather than a more opaque. But I think cerulean in its true form is a very opaque color, you know? I recently was playing with a swatch of trying to come up with a cerulean blue that was non-toxic, you know, without the cobalt in it. And I ended up using 3 different colors to come up with it. And I really like how it turned out. I think it turned out pretty. So I'm going to be offering it in the wood palette that I have coming out soon. But as far as cerulean, this is a beauty and something that I really like. But this is a real cerulean blue. It's not a cerulean blue hue. So it does have PB36, you know, but I have to tell you, toxicity in watercolor, it's not like you're eating the watercolor. If you're allergic, you know, getting it on your hands perhaps. But overall, watercolor, it's not going to give you that much trouble. It's not like it's, it doesn't have like turpentine or anything that's really that strong in it, right? Most of the toxicity you have to watch out when it's dry. So if you have watercolor that's got a toxic, it's not like a chemical, it's just a mineral, right? So if it has cobalt in it or cadmium in it, for cadmiums, and it's dry, and then you like mess it around and get it back to like powder form, it would take a lot of exposure and a lot of powder for it to be a real danger. I think it's mostly, and I've even known people who have drank paint water before, but nothing happened to them. They were fine, you know? I mean, I've had people that have by accident drank their paint water. Well, that would I bet you that tasted horrible. You have to have, in any case, other than having small children around that, you know, they get it all over and then they stick their hands in their mouths, or dogs that might lick paint or eat a tube of paint. Watercolor doesn't need to stray away from, you know, the natural elements and the natural colors and tones if you don't want it to. I would just, like anything else, professional watercolor is going to be toxic. It is going to have some things in it that are like heavy metals, but it takes a lot of it to harm you. Okay, so these are so pretty, right? Look at the cerulean. Isn't it beautiful? And the sap green. One of the prettiest sap greens, PG7, PY110. And that ultramarine blue is turning out good. So I'll leave a link in the description box for the sale so that you can get the sale code on my website if you want to order. Okay, so we did so far phthalo green, quin gold, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, sap green, azo orange, azo yellow, and pyro red. Which colors do you like so far? This might be a good time to let you know that this is one of my watercolors. This one is a new one called Aqua Suede. I really love it. It's so pretty. Turned out great. So let's use this other one for the Anthraquinone blue. Put it there. So this is a single pigment blue that is, the popularity of this blue has been on the rise lately. Several different lines make an Indian throne or Indian quinine blue. Some of them are more powdery drying than others, sorry. And some are more bold. This one has the ability to have an interesting looking mass tone, which I really like, and a light tone as well. It is a transparent, it's non-granulating blue. Although, I don't know, maybe my paper just, it typically, it will dry very, very smooth, but it's going to look really nice right now because it's still wet. So it's kind of fun to play with and throw some water on. Isn't it pretty blue? I love deep blues like this. To me, this looks a lot like my Prussian blue that I make because I like that deep kind of looking beautiful blue like this that just gives you those darks, you know, for the mountains, and then some of the lighter ones that you can use for skies and stuff. So it's very, very similar to a Prussian blue that I mix up a lot. But I like this. This is a beautiful blue. Okay, so those are the ones that I swatched. There's a lot more. I have other videos up with other colors as well. It's just I haven't made the cards yet for them. So I will jump back on at another time and definitely go through more swatching videos for you if you like this kind of video of me in the studio just kind of prepping watercolor. I'm usually going a lot faster, so I slowed down a little bit just to kind of explain things to you and show you the basics of how to fill a pan, as well as discussing tubes versus prepped pans, right? Because like when you buy, and also like, I don't know if you noticed, but here is the size of a standard full pan, like something by White Knights. And I didn't notice that until just recently. These are like, the pans that I use are bigger, way, way bigger than these White Knight pans. And that also goes for like Roman Schmal, and a lot of the imported pans, they seem to be a lot smaller. And I'm wondering why. And then on top of it, they're not all the way full. They're very, very like, they're 3/4 of the way full. So I wonder why they do that. Strange. Something I just noticed. So these are, I guess, extra large full pans that you're getting on the website. And that goes for the quarter pans too. I'm using really big pans. Okay, so I think I answered your questions. I hope you guys are enjoying yourself out there. Thanks for tuning in with me and hanging out in the studio while I do some stuff. I hope you like the new logo. Do you like the card idea? Is this something that you would collect if you were buying your watercolors. I also have these swatch cards coming out. I just redesigned them. So these are like little giveaway cards for the group page for Facebook. So when I do giveaways or when you order watercolor from me, you always get a swatch card with some different watercolors to try. So you get benefits of ordering your watercolor from a hand poured site like Jack's Watercolor. You'll get a lot of swatches to try out. So I just redesigned the card. I think it looks really good. I think it's fun. And then there is a single version of the card and also, of course, our subscription version. The subscription version is more like this. It's a very big piece of watercolor paper with the names of the watercolor on it. And then it comes with these really nice pans of paint. So you get like pans and a tin to keep all of your watercolors in for the 12 months of your subscription. You get brushes and lots and lots of paper to try, different paper samples. Very fun. Okay, saying goodbye again. Bye. Happy painting, guys. Thanks for watching.